So hello, and welcome to this demo of the SSF Stereo Dipole. Let's check out what's to come before we get into it. So this video is quite long. There's a lot of patch examples and different musical and technical examples throughout. If you wish to skip through, there's a timing index on screen and linked in the description so you can skip through those patches as you see fit. Now we'll go through the stereo dipole both in terms of demoing the sound and the features at the same time. This is a quad filter with a ton of control, volt per octave tracking, ping it, audio rate modulate it, just do a ton of things at once. Have a simple saw wave, low pitched into input A, and this will normal over to B, coming out of a single pole on each side. It's going to get a 12 dB filter response, both set to low pass, and we can just simply control that from the cutoff. Just drop the res. It's just got a really lovely analog filter sound right off the bat. There's a drive per side, should we wish to really drive this. Notice the bottom end. Let's try that with some res. We get these master controls in the center. We get cutoff and resonance controls for each pole as well. Individual frequency modulation inputs, stereo frequency modulation inputs, resonance inputs, stereo resonance inputs. Got attenuators and attenuators on a lot of this as well. We've actually got the dipoles, which is 2 filters. So if I move to that, these are all low pass filters, but we can spread them per side. So I can spread the peaks between these. All tracks volt per octave really well. We can change these filter cores. So if you wanted like a quad bandpass thing going on, we can globally control it, spread them out. Just change each side. We could have a mixture, say high and low pass on that side, band and high pass on that side. It responds to audio rate modulation really well. Let's get stuck in. So in this patch, I just wanted to explore using the stereo dipole as a stereo filter, but exploring that kind of filter burn, that saturation on these 2 drive controls that we get. So I'm just going to play around quickly. There is some stereo reverb. I'll of course lose that in a second. There's plenty of modulation, which we'll go through as well. Let's just sweep the cut off, turn a couple of knobs, and check out the sound of this driven filter. So let's lose the reverb. This is two oscillators, both single saw waves into both sides of the dipole, and they're tuned a fifth apart. Playing off the same sequence. So I have a main envelope into the stereo FM, and then two other envelopes into the FM on each side. One's a random trigger on the right here, and the other is a more busy pattern that's kind of playing off of the main envelope. So both cutoffs have their own envelope, plus another one that affects them both. The stereo resonance is being modulated by a stepped sequence, and I've got different looping envelopes and LFOs to the spread, and they're both set to low pass modes on both of those filter sides. So that's 4 low passes, 2 per side. The VOP per octave I'm using for audio rate modulation, with a rate of an oscillating filter. It's just a sine wave, way above kind of human hearing, which is why we can't hear it. But as I sweep the pitch of this down, ton of really nice audio rate modulation to be had, and we'll explore audio rate modulation throughout the whole video. Let's just have a quick play around with it. So this patch is processing a stereo granular loop, and I've got this side set to be this one right here on the left, set to be a high pass and a band pass, and then the right hand side is a low pass and a band pass. So when I turn the main stereo cutoff knob, one side will kind of open as the other side closes. We're coming out of the dipole output again. Notice this now weighted to the left. High pass with the cutoff all the way down, so one of these poles, one of the filters kind of wide open. Over to the right, the low pass, one of the poles on the right hand side, is now fully open and the high pass is fully closed, so I can kind of balance my stereo image with this master cutoff control. Now I have 4 unsynced LFOs into each FM input and the spread inputs, just giving me this kind of nice, whooshy, phasery kind of vibe. I have some audio rate modulation into the stereo FM, which we can kill. And again, I'll just sweep the cutoff, move the resonance a little bit manually on top of this LFO modulation, bringing the audio rate in and out. And this is just completely dry coming out of the dipole. So I started making kick drums with the dipole for this demo, and then figured why not try and make a full kind of 3-part drum kit and create a beat, something a bit more unique with the dipole. And here's the result. A kind of 2-part moving bass drum, a kind of noise clap thing, and then I'm kind of faking it with delay to try and create some kind of shaker or hi-hat pattern on top. Now I'll lose the delay, and then this is entirely raw dipole. Kick is all the green cables on the left hand side, all the yellow cables on the right hand side is this noise. So first, let's check out the kick. Now I'm using an envelope to resonance instead of putting this into a VCA. Typically with most filters I would get them oscillating, resonating at full kind of self-oscillation, tune it down low, add an envelope to its pitch, which I'm doing through the FM input, and then plug it into a low pass gate or a VCA to close it down. But the envelope into resonance here served a really nice purpose of just closing off the sound. So I have envelope to FM for the pitch, envelope to resonance effectively for amplitude in this case, and a stepped sequence to the spread, which is moving these two filters around. If I remove that, much simpler sound. Now, losing the kick side, again, left hand side, and the right hand side snare. Envelope to resonance, noise to cutoff or FM. sending this into a delay and then EQing out a load of the low end. Kinda like a fake shakery hi-hat on top. But that's all the dipole and just this echo to create this 16th note pattern. Kind of quirky little drum kit. So it wouldn't be a DivKid filter demo if there wasn't a little bit of acid involved. And the dipole does a really great liquid acidic low pass filter. So again, let me break down this patch. Have a kick and a hi-hat completely secondary to dipole. The hi-hat is sidechained against the kick. And then the right hand side of dipole is taking a saw wave at its input, have an envelope to the FM, and that's it. I'm coming out of the single pole output and purely taking the dipole output just to feed the data for a little bit of eye candy on the scope to the left. So here is the right hand side of dipole. And you can hear externally this is being sidechained against the kick as well, giving us this pumping feel and sound. And kind of whatever resonance setting you set it at, it just sounds great. So against the kick, we're getting this pumping vibe. Now I'm routing the sound from the right hand side, the acidic synth line, into the left hand side through a send on my mixer. And removing this, I'm modulating the actual spread between these two poles with a stepped sequence, and I'm gating the cutoff. These are both set to be a bandpass, so getting this kind of dual bandpass moving sequenced kind of resonant trail over our echo effect, and having that play off the actual synth line itself. We kind of play off this 303 like classic kind of acidic sound on one side, this kind of resonant vocal like quality to having these two resonant filters moving on the left. I just wanted to fade that in just to show how kind of gloriously smooth and clean and lovely that just stereo low pass filtering can be. Now this is kind of my input dry, resonance is down, cutoff is open. This is set to be a low pass, there's no spread on either dipole, on either of the filters on either side. And this is kind of just my clean input. So this is going to be a relatively quick patch, but I just wanted to mix a couple of oscillators and a noise source together and explore some sort of typical dual filter and quad filter to push it a little further kind of patching. So I have a high pass into a low pass, opening up the low pass and dropping down the cutoff on the high pass. Have a square wave, which is an octave below a saw wave, and a little bit of noise mixed in a mixer coming into this left hand side. Now I'm using the pole outputs rather than the dipole outputs. So this is like a single high pass filter into a single low pass filter. Here's sweeping that high pass and just exploring a bit of the sound with some resonance as well. Now if we come out of the dipole output, we can get some interesting dual peak stuff going on before we hit this low pass. And you can hear as we move that spread, these two filter cores move apart, giving us this kind of dual peak high passing before we hit the low pass. So here's the low pass side. So in this patch, we're going to look at filter pings. Now I have a 4 to the floor kick, which is this. I also have some echo on the dipole, which I'll turn off for now. So pings. A filter ping is where you set a filter's resonance very high, nearly at the point of oscillation, but just below it, and you put a trigger into the audio input. So just a short spike of voltage, not actual audio, just to excite this near oscillating filter. So to just come out of one pole, one of the 4 in the stereo dipole, trigger comes in, it excites this circuit, this very near oscillation, and I can tune my cutoff. But because we've got 2 on this side, come out to the dipole, I can use the spread to tune up an interval. And because my audio from A normals across to B, and that resonance is set just below oscillating, and obviously bear in mind here that the actual resonance per side and the stereo resonance all play into each other here. So that side is receiving the same audio input, it's pinging both sides, coming out of the main output that mixes them together. We can tune in the 2 cutoffs, the 2 spreads, and get a nice 4-note chord. Playing this against the kick. Adding the echo back in. Now of course I don't have to ping both sides with the same thing. I'm pinging the left-hand side, currently both of them because of that normalizing, with a divide by 5 of my main clock. Here's a divide by 3. Just going to lose the effects again in the kick. Get some nice interesting melodic but rhythmic interplay between the two. Now I could add, say, some FM to the stereo FM and affect all of it. I could add some sample and hold instead of that FM, and say different audio rate sources to the FM of each side. So here's an electro drum break playing right out of the Erica Sims sample drum. You can see that bouncing around on data. And in this patch, we're just going to explore the drive. We have a drive on both sides of the dipole, so I wanted to chain them and just explore the kind of drive and destruction that this can offer. Some of the patches so far have been really kind of clean and beautiful, and dipole will do both. So let's kind of crank up the drive and see what happens. There is a lot of high end in this loop, and it's going to get pretty aggressive, so just be careful if you've got your headphones on loud or anything. Now let's chain across to the right hand side. Pretty brutal. And luckily it's a filter. We can shave off some of the harshness, but there's tons of drive on tap if you want, and everything from kind of warm and gentle. We'll maybe put it on like an 808 style bass drum in a second. I've also got the sample drum though going into an envelope follower to get some nice kind of pumping, almost compression like effects with the filtering. I'll just go back to one side of this. Nice kind of pumping filter vibe. Now we can invert this because these are attenuators for the FM input. And it's a nice kind of pumpy, slappy, again, kind of compression-like effect. Now let's change that input to an 808 style bass drum, something simple, and just go through the kind of warming through distortion, all-out destruction that the drive offers. So here's just one side of the dipole, fairly clean with the drive down. Let's crank up the drive. You can hear some of those harmonics. That's very much the kind of warm distortion, warm overdrive kind of territory. Through your kind of soft clip-like sound up to distortion. Now let's get this across into the other side, chain this in series. Just a really great distortion sound. So here we're going to explore the dipole as an oscillator. Resonance is up, have a volt per octave signal coming in. We're coming out of a single pole on that left-hand side. Tracks well, great sine wave oscillator. Now, the first thing I like to do with the dipole is to come out of the actual dipole output and tune them with the spread to get like a dual oscillator vibe. And just mixing sine waves, there's quite a lot of interesting intervals to be found, and because you're just tuning filters against each other, I tend to think differently than I do if I was actually sequencing up musical intervals. But of course we have a whole other side to the dipole, another two oscillating sines if we wish. So let's just go to one sine and FM that from another one. There's a good range of tones and it seems very musical, it responds really well to this FM. Let's try it with the dipole. Just tune up to a different interval. Now of course we could frequency modulate with the dipole from the right hand side. Giving us lots to go at. We can push it even further with cross modulation. So we're patching this side to frequency modulate this one. Let's patch this side to frequency modulate that one. And it becomes your new favourite noise oscillator. Let's lose the sequence for now. And I didn't think I'd be making a noise oscillator with a filter. Let's get that sequence back in. Now here I just want to quickly touch on a little kind of tip that Andrew from SSF gave me, and that's that actually changing the switches, the modes of these four different filters will affect this AB mixed quad filter output when they're in series. And I'll just take you through what each filter's doing. That's the pole A on the left, and then the dipole, pole B on the right, and then the dipole, and the mixed output. Now putting this in series, because the filters that are now oscillating are feeding the input of the other in series, And they're just sine waves, they're not actual waveforms to kind of filter, they're either there or not because it's just the fundamental sine. But changing these filter modes will start to affect the blend of these 4 oscillating filter cores. So I just flick the switches and you'll see what I mean. So it's just something to bear in mind if you're using these in series and out of this mixed Dipole AB output, those switches are going to affect the way that this all kind of blends together. So although we've used audio rate modulation elsewhere in the video, I just wanted a specific little section that focuses on it. And you all know that I like a good yoy, and now you can have a quad yoy. Quad yoy sounds like your new favourite Eastern dish, but a new quad yoy audio rate filter sound. Let's just explore some audio rate modulation. Here's a simple low pass saw wave at the input. And then here's a sine wave oscillator right into the FM. And it just responds to FM really well. It seems to take any rate of kind of audio rate that you throw in there. Let's go Dipole AB. The input's going to normal across. Let's go into... So it's just plenty of audio rate modulation, it just takes to it really well. And I'll continue to use it through other sections in the video. So here we're going to look at just another typical dual filter type example with high pass into low pass. Now we're going to look at a bit of a bass boost trick that I've just taken off. And just that kind of variable bandwidth that you can create when you have a high pass going into a low pass in series. Now I've patched this from one to the other, into A, out of the single pole, into B, and coming out of B. Let's just play around. Now first, this kind of bass boost trick, and this was a really common trick on a Korg MS-20 which had a high pass going into a low pass. You boost up the resonance, and with that first cut off for the high pass, you find the point at which the kind of low end is really singing and the resonance is boosting it, and there's your kind of bass boost. It adds a big low end peak to what's going through the filter. So let's crank the resonance and kind of find that fundamental low end. And you might need your speakers cranked up or some headphones to hear this properly. You can hear it really kind of blowing out the kick there, but just going a bit lower. And then cranking that resonance back up. There's our kind of low boost. Just losing the resonance, let's focus on this variable bandwidth idea. For a band pass. Now we can create a band, use the stereo cutoff to move both of those cutoffs as if this is just one collective bandpass filter. But the variable width comes in when we actually move these cutoffs away from each other. Where we're kind of coming in and opening back out again. So here we're going to use the stereo dipole as a quad LFO. Now my patch is simple. I have one triangle wave patched into two VCAs, so I've just split the signal, same input to both VCAs, and I'm taking the A and the B, or the left and the right outputs, just a single pole on each for now, into data and then into the CV inputs on these VCAs, so each LFO opens and closes this VCA. They're hard panned left and right, there's a bit of reverb, which I'll turn down. And that's simply the patch, with these cutoffs all the way down, and because this will process and produce sub-audio CV, that's why we can get this oscillating as an LFO. Now we can control both with the main kind of master stereo cutoff, and of course, control them individually with their cutoffs as well. Now moving to the dipole outputs. Here we can get these overlapping sine waves at sub-audio, creating more complex LFOs. Now let's say we want to CV this, we've got quite nicely controllable CVable LFOs there. You have a ton of options for controlling the rates of these LFOs and pushing them around. So here's another patch that Andrew at SSF was talking to me about, and it is kind of sub-audio boom, as I've called it. Andrew called it a Kinetic LFO. Now this is taking the idea of pinging a filter, which is where we strike a short trigger into the input with a nearly oscillating filter to create a ping, clave-like percussive little filter ping sounds. I do that earlier in this video in case you missed it. But doing this at sub-audio is what Andrew called a Kinetic LFO. So I have a nearly oscillating filter at sub-audio rates being an LFO, and then this ping, and I'm using an LED cable to show you when it does ping, gives this kind of triggered pinged LFO. It's quite a unique effect. You can see that the ping is quite active in the actual output. We get a little spike in voltage and then an LFO that kind of wobbles and fades away. I'm taking this output here and just modulating another filter just with a simple shark tooth wave at its input. Now coming out of the dipole, we're getting these interesting crossovers of the two sine waves. We can of course come out of the other side, or the Dipole AB, set these in parallel, and because these inputs normal, it's going to ping both sides, give us an interesting, random feeling sine LFO. Still very much pinged and excited by this trigger at the input. So in this patch we're going to look at imparting chord tones, which is kind of an extension of pinging the filter over your mixes or your beats. So here I have a kick, snare and kind of little noise hi-hat hit. And I'm sending the little top noise kind of hi-hat and the snare out through the send and return on my mixer into the dipole to excite these nearly oscillating, highly resonant bands, all tuned, all four filters to a chord. Sounds like this. Let's get that hi-hat in. Bit of delay over these chord tones. I am taking both dipole outs hard left and right. And it's nice that the dipole is responding to the actual audio that I put in. Say I add some kick, here's the kick on its own, and then turning some of that up into the dipole. You can kind of jam on what's being fed into it. And impart these chord tones over the audio that's coming into the dipole, get that into the mixer with some delay. So because the stereo dipole will process sub-audio modulation, LFOs, envelopes, just sub-audio rate voltage changes, here we're going to use it as a slew. So the blue trace on data is a stepped sequence that I want to modulate filter B, the right hand side of the dipole with. I'm bringing it into side A to slew it, which is like a glide or lag portamento. It smooths out and rounds off hard step changes in the voltage. Now if I turn the cutoff up, we can hear that just steps, and the yellow trace on data there is the output of filter A that I'm using as a slew with its cutoff all the way down, and that's modulating the filter cutoff simple low pass over a square wave on filter B. So I'll lower the cutoff and we'll start to hear and we'll see on data these edges smooth off and round off, giving us a slewed version of this stepped modulation. So you can just hear a bit of that character and that slew, that kind of just rounded edge. Now it's kind of so slewed it feels almost like just a random LFO just wobbling up and down. But of course this filter's got a lot of modulation inputs. Let's get something to modulate that cutoff A on the left hand side and modulate the slew time. So there's a simple gate signal on that LED cable, and when the gate's high it's going to turn the cutoff up and get rid of that slew. We could go the other way and attenuate this. So when the gate's active, it's pulling the cutoff down, giving us more of a slew. And of course we could play around with resonance as well. Start to inject little bits of oscillation into this modulation. And we'll explore that with some resonant envelopes in a later patch. Feedback, to me, is always a really kind of beautiful thing to be explored and pushed and abused. It certainly doesn't always sound beautiful, but if you see my whole self-patched series, you'll know that I like feedback. But in more tame musical environments, feedback can still be really interesting. So here's a patch with a saw wave into the A side of the dipole, an envelope to the cutoff, very simple, fairly acidic kind of bass riff. However, I'm taking the output through this blue stackable cable. One of these goes to my output and the other goes to a mixer that is feeding my input, creating a feedback path. So simply turning up the feedback, the amount of the filter being fed back to its input. Notice it's really starting to kind of round out that bottom end. Getting some kind of nasty bits if you like. Let's lose the envelope modulation and just explore this feedback a little bit more. So here's no feedback and then slowly turning it up. You can hear this real bass boost that we get, and the drive and the cutoff, it's all going to be very interactive. that kind of feedback growl to it. So I just wanted to explore this kind of sub-audio CV processing with the stereo dipole. I have an envelope coming in, that's this blue trace on the top of data, and then the yellow trace is the output of the dipole. And I've zoomed in so you can see the scope really nice and clear, and all I'm going to move is the A, cutoff and resonance that you can also see on screen. So if I just zoom in and get the detail in there. Now of course we can slew this envelope, and the sound is a nice simple patch. It's a triangle wave into a VCA, and the output of the dipole, which has this envelope going through it, controlling the CV of the VCA. So we could slew this simple ADSR shape. Nicely kind of round it out, but we can add some resonance and get some interesting resonant envelope type vibe going on. That's kind of LFO from the dipole meets envelope. I'll turn up the resonance and you'll see. You can see in here this kind of bounce that's on the tail end of this envelope. That's because of the rate of the cutoff in this now oscillating filter. So I'll play around with resonance and cutoff a little more. We'll just explore this idea of a resonant envelope a little bit further. And we get into AM synthesis territory because the cutoff's high enough to be an oscillating, well, like a sine wave oscillator at this point, and that's kind of imposed itself on this envelope, modulating the VCA, giving us this AM synthesis overtones. Let's drop that cutoff again, slew the envelope, and just find a less resonant but still interesting kind of bounce to the whole thing. So you can see just the higher part of that envelope has this wobble. It's an interesting way to play around again with modulation. This is simply modulating a VCA. It could go to a cutoff, pitch, FM depth, anything you want to throw it at within your modular system. So to finish on, I just wanted to go through chaining these filters to create a really steep 48 dB kind of 8-pole like low pass response should you need a really steep filter. So everything you're hearing is going through the dipole, the droning oscillator, the little plucked melody, the synth effect string stuff, the reverb and the delay. Now my output, let's start with just a single pole low pass. I'm just going to go through and explain and show you how we can chain these for steeper responses. Each filter core is like a 2-pole 12 dB filter response. And listen to the top end kind of above the cutoff frequency change as I chain across from one pole to the dipole a little duller. And then I run the dipole into the other side, duller again, and duller yet again when I come out of that dipole. So 12 dB pole output, 2 poles set similar to be low pass is like a 24 dB, chain that across to the other pole output is like a 36 dB response, and then to the dipole that's 4 filter cores, all low pass filtering, and just controlling it from that stereo cutoff. We can play around with the spread, we can do more interesting things, which I'll do in a minute, as well as add some audio rate modulation. We just get this really steep low pass, and it's just really lovely and smooth, certainly with this ambient. Patch thing that I've got going on. So let's do something a little bit more interesting, maybe change some of what these filters are in terms of their actual filter mode, do some spread, add some audio rate modulation as well. So thanks for watching this video on the Stereo Dipole from SSF. Quite frankly, a pretty amazing filter. I tried to be fairly non-subjective and just to show you what things are, how they sound, and give you some patch ideas. But it's hard to contain excitement for things sometimes, and it really does sound good. I hope the examples speak to the kind of experience that I feel like I've had with it. Hit like, subscribe, leave a comment. If you've got any questions, of course. If you're going to go out and get one, leave a comment. But go support me on patreon.com/DivKid if you like the work I do. If not, no worries, and I'll see you next time. Cheers for watching.